Lately, I've been noticing something. People are starting to gather around the table again. Not for anything elaborate, just slower evenings, simple meals with real conversation. For a long time, it felt like the dinner table was just disappearing. We were eating in front of the TV, grabbing takeout, or just eating on the run. And honestly, we still do that many nights. We eat in front of the TV. But overall, something has been changing. More people are rediscovering the simple pleasure of sitting down, sharing a meal they made themselves, and having quiet conversations. Making memories right at home. And it's not about perfection anymore. It's about how it feels to be there. And here's what's really interesting. The pieces people are reaching for to create that feeling, they're not new, they're vintage. And as a vintage seller, I've been watching this happen in real time. The things that people are buying, they're exactly the pieces that make a table or any kind of get-together feel special. And once you notice it, you begin to see vintage completely differently. Hi, I'm Carol and I sell vintage on Etsy. Over the years, I have also hosted many dinners in my homes in Michigan and Florida. Sometimes holiday meals, sometimes seasonal dinners, and sometimes just simple meals with friends. The photos in the opening were not AI generated or stock photos. They were actual photos that I took of tables I've set in my own home. Some for dinner parties, some just because I have a bit of a hobby setting up tablescapes and photographing them. Not anything too over the top. Just me using my many sets of dishes and serving pieces to set special tables for special and even everyday occasions. People are rediscovering the joy of welcoming others into their homes, and some people online have even started calling this trend Hostingcore. And as I've noted in other videos, many people seem to be turning away from purely decorative collectibles and toward items they can actually use when friends come over. That's something I've been noticing both in the comments on my channel and in what people are buying from my shop. In this video, we'll be exploring the implications for vintage resellers and for people who are loving using beautiful vintage pieces to make their get-togethers special. So why is hosting making a comeback? One reason may simply be that people are craving real connection again. After several years where so much of life happened online or in seclusion, many people want something different. They want conversation, they want shared meals, and they want moments that feel a little more intentional. And hosting a small dinner is one of the simplest ways to do that. I often hear people say something that I've heard older people saying for years, and that is, use the good china. And I think that idea really resonates with people today. This photo shows my high-top table in my front room set for my son's senior prom dinner. Well, you can tell by the paint on the wall. It's been a while since this dinner happened. But he and his friend, along with their dates, enjoyed dinner on the hand-painted china my mother-in-law and husband's aunt painted for us as a wedding gift, along with matching lavender linen napkins. I used the lavender stemware that I registered for and got as wedding gifts too, while my son and his friends were enjoying a special prom night dinner in our front room. All 8 of us parents enjoyed dinner together at the kitchen table. It was a great night. Now, I don't sell much china or plates, although I think I'm going to start going in that direction a little bit. But I have been selling a lot of silver-plated flatware over the past year, not usually in full sets, but in what I call specialty sets. 4 teaspoons, 4 salad forks, 8 iced teaspoons, or individually, especially if they're serving pieces or sterling. I think another reason for this emergence of Hostingcore may be the influence of visual platforms like Pinterest, but they have trained people to think in scenes. A dinner table is one of the easiest scenes to create. It's contained, it's as colorful as you want it to be, and when you place a few thoughtful pieces on the table, an ordinary meal suddenly becomes something that people call a tablescape. People are essentially designing a moment, and the dinner table is a very manageable place to start doing that. This, by the way, is one of those scenes I set on my front room table last summer. We only eat in there on holidays and when we need the overflow room, but I like to keep that table set as though I might be having friends dropping over for lunch anytime. Here I've used the Taylor Smith Taylor boutonniere dishes just like my maternal grandmother had. You can see that I have the matching butter dish and salt and pepper shaker. And in addition, my husband made me a tiered tray for a centerpiece similar to the tiered trays we make with career knives dishes and sell in our shop. Butter dishes have been selling especially well for me, but I have been selling a large number of salt and pepper shakers as well. And you don't need everything to match to make it special. Mix and match is fine. I've also been noticing a change in how people design and use their homes. After years of open concept living, many homeowners are rediscovering the appeal of separate spaces again, I think mostly since 2020, and especially in their dining rooms. When homes are one large open space, the dining table sometimes just becomes another surface. But when there's a dedicated place for gathering around the table, suddenly those beautiful serving pieces make perfect sense again. And that's exactly the kind of setting vintage pieces were originally designed for. Here's another table setting with that same dinnerware using a different tablecloth and different serving pieces. Notice the covered serving dish. This one matches my dinnerware, but silver plate serving dishes blend into any table setting beautifully. Silver plate covered serving dishes have been a good seller for me, not just in the last few months, but for a couple of years now. Now, many vintage objects were created specifically for entertaining. Butter dishes, relish trays, crystal stemware, serving platters, gravy boats. These weren't decorative objects when they were made. They were everyday tools for gathering people around the table. And something else that appeals to many people today is that using vintage pieces is also a very sustainable choice. Instead of constantly replacing inexpensive home goods, these pieces have already lasted for decades and they're still doing their job beautifully. Now here's an everyday place setting using my career knives blue and white dishes that my paternal grandmother and my aunt used to have. No tablecloth here, just my patriotic table runner. I do have many of these serving pieces for this set. Actually, I probably have all of them. The butter dish, serving bowl, salt and pepper, everything. But even one or two of these pieces can make a table feel more special. I've noticed a lot of people buying those special serving pieces that will go with any table setting. And notice also in this table setting, I've used a single cobalt Blinko candlestick holder as the center accent. Candlestick holders have been selling very well for me. In fact, the customer who purchased this set of 3 blue and white candlestick holders told me specifically in a message that she was buying them to use on her own dining table for a dinner party. And here's a fall tablescape using that same set of dishes, but notice how different it looks when it's dressed up seasonally. Here I've used a silver plate pitcher as a vase for the centerpiece. Now these are becoming more scarce in the wild and I am having a harder and harder time finding them where I shop, but in the last couple of years I have sold quite a few of them. Now, modern hosting is not about recreating the past exactly. Now, here's a photo of my cousin. She just turned 90, but here she's enjoying a formal dinner with her friends in high school in the 1950s. Our modern get-togethers don't look like that. People are mixing pieces much more freely now. Different floral patterns, different glassware, vintage pieces mixed with modern ones. Instead of everything matching perfectly, the table feels more curated and personal when the items are mixed and matched, especially if they go well together. Now in this example, I set the table here for Thanksgiving in Florida. I've mixed my modern square plates with my vintage Queen Bess silver plate flatware, water for crystal goblets, and a few vintage glass pieces. It's a mixture of old and new. And here is a Christmas morning photo of my kitchen table ready for my grandchildren. And yes, those are festive paper plates and paper napkins. But I am using my good silver plate candlestick holders with battery operated tapers. Do you see those 3 older looking plates along the middle of the table? Those are the 3 lone Christmas plates I have from my grandmother's Christmas dishes. They're quite plain, probably from the 1940s, but they are beautifully decorated with gilded Christmas trees all around the rim. And that's how you can use an older vintage piece to make a modern table setting special. It's welcoming rather than formal. Now, as a vintage seller, I've been seeing signs of this change in what people are buying. Stemware sets sell quickly. Butter dishes are consistently popular. Small serving pieces move steadily. And one thing that surprised me lately is how many silver plate serving pieces I have been selling. When I first started sourcing those gravy boats and covered serving dishes, I honestly wondered if they might sit in my shop for a long time. But they've been selling quite steadily. And what's interesting about something like a gravy boat is that it's not really a decorative item. It's not going to be used as something decorative if it's not being used on the table. Sometimes people do worry that vintage dining pieces will be too much work to care for. But in practice, many of these items are surprisingly easy to maintain. Silver plate only needs occasional polishing. Crystal glasses can often be hand washed quickly after a meal. And by the way, I'm sure your mother's told you that crystal should be the first items washed in the dishwater before the greasy plates and cookware get tackled. I wouldn't put them in the dishwasher. Well, I don't put anything in a dishwasher because I haven't used a dishwasher for many years. I'd rather wash it, rinse it, dry it, and put it away than drag it out for 3 hours. There are many ways to enjoy vintage pieces while keeping things simple. And that's the nice thing about hosting today. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be very simple. A table, a meal, a few thoughtful pieces. Sometimes hosting is nothing more complicated than putting a loaf of bread on the table and inviting people to sit down. And even small vintage items like linen napkins or vintage coasters, I've sold so many of those, well, they can make thoughtful hostess gifts that carry that same spirit of hospitality forward. Remember, vintage functional pieces carry a history with them. They were made to be used to serve meals, to pass dishes, to gather people together. And when we use them today, we're continuing that tradition in our own homes. In the end, hosting isn't really about perfection or formality. It's simply about making space at the table for others. And sometimes the most meaningful gatherings begin with nothing more than a table, a meal, and a few pieces that remind us to slow down and just sit together for a while. I hope that you'll join me next week for part 3 of this series. We're going to take this idea of Hostingcore a step further and look at how these pieces are making their way back into everyday life, coffee bars, weekend brunches, and those evening wind down moments with people you truly enjoy. Because it's one thing to see them, it's another thing to understand how to use them to help other people see that too. And that's where it really starts to get exciting. By the way, if you missed part 1 of this series from last week, I will link it right up here and I'll link it down in the description also. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you enjoy hosting at home? And do you use vintage pieces on your table? Let me know in the comments what your favorite vintage item is for entertaining. And thanks so much for being here today.